I want to hear cannons. Downfield, pull up, ball to the 5, touchdown Tampa Bay. Mike Evans does it again. Fire the cannons, Bucs.
It's first and goal. That's picked off. That's picked off. And who else? Rondé Barber. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers may ride to the Super Bowl with that one.
Third down, 18. Dropping Gannon, looking Gannon. Throws up with the head. Intercepted. 30. Derek Brooks 30. Brooks to the 25. 20. Derek Brooks all the way. There it is. The dagger's in. We're going to win the Super Bowl. And there the cannons go. Fire them. Keep on firing them. Keep on firing them.
Hello and welcome back, Bucs fans, to a brand new edition of the Cannon Fire Podcast live on YouTube today. I'm your host, as always, Rhett Matthew, joined alongside me from BucsNation.com, Evan Wanish. Today we are going to bring you the latest red and pewter headlines from the week before the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. The Bucs, fresh off a 32-9 victory over the Philadelphia Eagles, are prepared to take one hell of a road trip to Detroit, a team that they've already played once this season, for a highly anticipated matchup, and the winner will move on to the NFC Championship game. But it's not the playoffs without a little bit of extra drama, and for the Buccaneers, they just got some more bulletin board material this week, as we are going to dive into the details of a little bit of trash talk between Chauncey Gardner-Johnson and Baker Mayfield. But first and foremost, Evan, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well. Obviously, the week's been a little bit of a whirlwind. I think with the Bucs playing on Monday, you sort of get thrown off. So it's already Wednesday, and we're preparing for a game on Sunday. So this is normally our Tuesday show, obviously happening on Wednesday, but we will still have our game preview show with some special guests on Friday. So that will not change. But I'm doing pretty well.
So let's just go ahead and get into our cover story here. Ahead of this weekend's divisional playoff game, Lions defensive back C.J. Gardner-Johnson takes a shot at Buccaneers quarterback Baker Mayfield. Now, for anyone who has followed this podcast or really followed the Bucs for an extended period of time, you should be familiar with C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Used to be a pretty notorious Saints defensive back. I believe the one who laid the hit on Chris Godwin to knock him out of the 2021 season.
No, I think that was P.J. Williams. I think it was P.J. Williams. I could be wrong, but I think it was P.J. Williams.
I think you may be correct. But during his time as a New Orleans Saint, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was also notorious for laying out some dirty hits here and there. Well, he is most recently in Detroit, and he had some thoughts about the Buccaneers' wide receiver room this week. And actually, it was more of a backhanded compliment. He was complimenting the wide receiver room, and Baker Mayfield caught a little bit of a stray. So here is the full quote, talking about the team they had faced there in the first round. He said, quote, "This group probably is one of the better groups we have faced all year besides that group in Tampa. If you give that Tampa group a good quarterback, that's a great group. Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Russell Gage, that is a great group. When I played those guys, I played against them for real." So he is insinuating that he doesn't normally have to apply himself, but whenever he does play Tampa and he plays Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and apparently Russell Gage, he does have to apply himself. Now, a little bit of time did pass. Baker Mayfield was asked about it at his press conference today, and here is his response. J.C. Allen with the question.
Saw or not, the trash pack has already started. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson said this would be a good Bucs group if they had a starting quarterback. Mm-hmm. What are you going to say about that?
I don't think he's really watched film because you mentioned Russell Gage. We love Russell, but Russell hasn't played a snap all year for us. He must be going off the preseason stuff that the media was talking about, but he didn't play our first game, so I'm excited to see him. I think he's a really good player. He has been for a while, and he's been an impactful guy on every team he's been on. So he's a good player, but yeah, he's got to do a little bit more film study.
Whenever the Bucs play a guy like, C.J. Gardner-Johnson or even Cam Jordan, I'll group those guys together, it seems like it's inevitable that at some point they're going to take a couple of stabs at your team. But, I mean, if you're the Bucs, the more bulletin board material at this time of year, the better, in my opinion. I mean, Baker Mayfield just needs another excuse to go out there and throw for 300-plus yards this week.
I always liked one of my favorite clips of Baker in college was when I think he was playing Kansas. And they went at midfield. I think it was before the game. They went to shake hands, and the Kansas players didn't shake their hands. And he goes to shake thehas hands, and he just shakes his head and starts clapping. Like, I love that. So he's definitely a guy that is gonna listen to that and have a chip on his shoulder. He has had a chip on his shoulder this entire season. But he's a guy who takes that stuff to another level, to where it's like, yeah, like, Now he's going to be thinking about that. And I do think Tom Brady was very similar. Tom Brady did it in a little bit of a different way, though. Mayfield's more emotionally driven, I think, than Brady was. But I mean, yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens on Sunday. I mean, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson did not play the last time these two teams met, so I think John Ledyard actually brought up a decent point. He might be like, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson maybe watched the tape from that Bucs game against Detroit where Mayfield really didn't play that well. Like he missed a bunch. I think he missed Trey Palmer deep like 3 times in that game. So he didn't really play very well. And maybe like that's what he's forming his opinion on. But yeah, I mean, you'd think you'd know that Russell Gage wasn't in the lineup. But once a saint, always a saint. So not much you can do about it.
Baker Mayfield, a quarterback this season with Tampa Bay, who has earned over $2.85 million in incentives on top of that $4 million base contract.
He's going to earn a lot more net in about 2 months. So.
Yeah. So good for Baker Mayfield. Just more motivation for this team to continue to prove people wrong. And that's what I love to hear. That's the spirit of the postseason. That's football at its finest. A little bit of trash talk never hurt anybody. And hopefully it is just some extra motivation for the team headed into their biggest game of the season, no doubt. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and just kind of do a state of the Bucs show, because we talked a little bit about it on the post game from Sunday night, early Monday morning, about how the Bucs answered a lot of questions about their immediate future with that dominant win over the Birds on Monday Night Football. Todd Bowles will be back here next year. We know more than likely the Bucs are going to be ready to shell out some money to sign Baker Mayfield to a multi-year extension. Mike Evans seems to have a good chance of coming back with the veteran quarterback making his way back. We'll see what the market is looking like, but the Bucs are set up good. And I wanted to kind of dive into really Todd Bowles for the time being. Todd Bowles is a guy that we have been critical of here on the podcast time and time again. And while there's certain things as a head coach that I'm still not crazy about, there's still some tendencies that he has that I don't think are going to go away. Hanging on to timeouts, I don't think is going to go away. The inconsistencies with aggressiveness, 1 week we're going for it on 4th and 3, the other week we're not challenging anything. I don't know if that will change, but I am proud of Todd Bowles. I will say that. And I think with all the credit that Todd Bowles has gotten this season with where the Bucs were when they were playing much worse, that was on Todd Bowles. Like when the Bucs have been bad this year, it is on Todd Bowles. But in that same breath, when the Bucs have been good this year and as of right now playing some of their best football, I think Todd Bowles deserves a ton of credit for where this team is right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a great job, specifically the game plan that he put together against Philadelphia. Sort of, it reminds me a lot, and I think you said that you didn't say this on the air. You said this to me off the air, but you said like that game sort of reminded me of like the Super Bowl, basically. Obviously, it's not the same, but like it's sort of like the way the game played out. And I'm gonna agree with you there, but for a different point. And it's because the Bucs played the Chiefs earlier in that regular season, and the Chiefs pretty much, especially in that first half, did whatever they wanted, right? Like Tyreek Hill went off, I think, in the freaking first quarter, and the Chiefs were able to do whatever they wanted down the field, whatever, and the Bucs lost. Todd Bowles went back, and in the second time around in the playoffs, switched up the defensive game plan. This time around against the Eagles were able to do whatever they wanted to on the ground in week 3, rushing for 201 yards. That was the second most they've ran all year. And the Bucs, lost to the Eagles. This time around, Todd Bowles made adjustments and made it a point to not let the Eagles rushing attack beat them this time. And they did it with a lot of 6-man fronts. And it worked. It worked out very well. And I do think Todd Bowles deserves a ton of credit for that. Now, he has another opportunity this week because, again, just like the Eagles and just like the Chiefs, this was a Lions team that came into Tampa and beat the Buccaneers. So, and the Lions only put up 20 points, but I read the stats, I believe, on a segment that we have coming out for Believe. Jared Goff went off in that game, and they only scored 20 points, but they had a ton of yards. And let me actually, I'm pulling up the stat right now. Jared Goff in that game was 30 of 44 for 353 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions, passer rating of 107.5. The Lions did not try and run the ball much.
Yeah, they didn't. Only, 19, 20 carries between the 4 running backs that they tried to run the ball with, and
not much.
35 yards between all those guys.
And Amon St. Brown had 12 catches for 124 yards and a touchdown. So while the Lions only put up 20 points, that's a lot of yards. Like that is still a lot of yards. So I'm curious to see what adjustments does Todd Bowles make here. I do think blitzing Jared Goff is somewhat dangerous because he has been pretty good against the blitz. I think a key is going to be trying to manufacture pressure with 4 guys. And we'll talk about a little bit more about the Lions specifically on the Friday game preview show. But back to the point of just Todd Bowles making those adjustments, I think he does deserve a lot of credit, but I am curious to see how the adjustments he makes for Sunday's game. And yeah, I think especially because when you lose 6 or 7 and then you come back and you win 4 straight, right? And you win 4 straight, you win a gutsy game in Atlanta. You didn't play great, but you still won the game. Carolina, same thing. You didn't play great, but still won the game. And then you go into Green Bay, a tough place to play against one of the hotter teams in the NFL at the time, and the team that just beat the Dallas Cowboys on the road. You go in there and really dominate them, and then you come back at Jacksonville Jaguars, who they were slumping at the time, and they ended up missing the playoffs, a complete collapse, but still, they were still the leader in the South at that point on a big stage on Christmas Eve, and you thumped them. And I think Todd Bowles deserves credit for that, but he also deserves credit for rallying his troops.
Yep.
After losing to New Orleans, right? That just like we talked about after that game, it was a huge missed opportunity. You could have clinched the division against your arch rival at home, not had to worry about week 18. The pressure would have been off of you. You could have very easily laid down. And while Carolina is a terrible football team, and the Bucs didn't play great, right? They didn't score an offensive touchdown. Like they didn't score a touchdown. But they still won the game. This team could have laid down and said, well, I guess it's not going to happen. Or even the following week against Philadelphia, they could have said, man, we didn't even play that well against Carolina. How are we going to beat Philly? And they could have laid down. But instead they didn't. So I do think Todd Bowles, while you said there is going to be some things that frustrate you, I think. And that's, look, there's always going to be there. I think there's going to be things that frustrate you with Baker Mayfield. There's going to be things that the drops frustrate people with Mike Evans sometimes. Like it happens. But there is going to be some things, but I do think he does deserve credit for turning the season around, because 2 months ago at this time, like his job security was looking pretty bleak, and now he is locked in for 2024.
Yeah, the turnaround of that defense in the second half of the season as well. We had the conversation a lot throughout the course of the regular season about if Todd Bowles was going to be back as head coach. And one of the talking points was the regression of the Buccaneers defense, which ever since he came to town almost 6 years ago as a part of Bruce Arians' staff and D coordinator, the Bucs have had an above average defense, I would say, every year, right? Like even when they were playing their worst, I don't think they were the worst in the league. I would say that when you count in the totality of an NFL regular season. But we've had a little bit more time to look back at the Todd Bowles masterclass on defense from Monday night, and we talk about the turnaround of this Buccaneers defense. Another thing he deserves credit for, man, mixing up defensive fronts. And I feel like he was kind of in his bag a little bit on Monday night because he pulled out some things that we have not quite seen in the regular season, and I think it's going to be interesting to see what he does this Sunday against Detroit. We'll obviously dive into that a little bit more on the game preview on Friday, but I just wanted to note some of the things that he did, and he's been notorious for this over the years as well. Vita Vea had multiple snaps where he drops back into coverage. I'm not really sure what you do as a quarterback when you look up and standing in that middle zone is 350-pound number 50. Yaya Diaby was used as a standing middle linebacker to rush the passer multiple times, which was another interesting look. I don't think I've seen that at all this regular season. But mixing up defensive fronts and just confusing a quarterback, confusing an offensive line to where, from snap to snap, they don't know what's going to come at them. I think that defensive prowess is something that we have praised Bowles a lot for over the years. And Monday night was just another example, because you take away that one big deep shot, the Bucs could have held Philly without a touchdown.
Yeah. That's pretty much it. And, that was just a lapse in coverage by Antoine Winfield Jr., and that's rare, that has been rare for him. So, I definitely agree. The Bucs, the game plan was great. The players executed, which I always say, it's not always on the coaches. The coaches can put a game plan together, that's great. And at the same time, though, the players got to execute. And credit to the Buccaneers players for executing there. And I believe it was actually Tony in the chat that even mentioned, the plays were there against the Lions. It just the players didn't execute. And I think execution is going to be a pretty big part of Sunday's game. And whoever executes better, I think is going to come out victorious.
While we talk about the status of the Bucs, I wanted to talk about the status of the Bucs fan base and also just express how proud I am of this Buccaneers fan base. To put it simply, on Monday night, from what I understand, it was probably a ratio of like 80 to 20 red jerseys to green jerseys. One of the 2 regular season games I was able to make this year in person was that Monday night game against Philly, and they outnumbered us that game. It was embarrassing, watching the Bucs get ran through, sitting in the stands until 000, and then just hearing all those dumbass Philly fans with their stupid chants echo through the stadium. I was, it was a rough day, but I think being outnumbered was the worst part of it. And listen, this is something that I've come to expect as a Bucs fan. Like, we've kind of tackled this topic before. I think there's always going to be some teams and some games, especially in the regular season, where not everybody's going to show up. And that's okay. Yeah. I've come to expect it. It doesn't break my heart. But what makes me really happy is when the playoffs come around and there is a general consensus among the fan base to not sell tickets to any Philly fans. And it seems like whatever they did this week ended up paying off, because all the accounts that I hear are not only was the place packed with red and pewter, but the energy was absolutely electric. One of the most exciting Bucs home games in a number of years.
Yeah, it's always a good sign. Like we talked about, it's being in Florida. It's tough, like you go look at the Miami game, look at the Jacksonville game, look at the, Las Vegas Raiders game, look at the Los Angeles Rams game. I mean, look at the Chargers game. Those types of cities and those types of towns, you're going to get a lot of fans that go for a vacation and catch a game. Like you just are, especially when it's teams like the Eagles, the Cowboys, the Packers, like those teams, like even the Bears, like those like historic, big time franchises in the NFL. The Steelers are a great one. Like, those guys, they're going to travel pretty well. And especially when, you get these northern states, right? Just like I mentioned, Philly, Pittsburgh, Green Bay, like all these people are up there in the cold, right? They're going to come down to sunny Tampa and catch a game. And I do think, you are more likely to see that in a regular season game than in the playoffs. But even with Tom Brady, you saw that at times. I don't think that's ever going to change, really. But it is a good sign to see in a playoff game, in a big moment on Monday Night Football that, the Bucs fans showed out. And, credit to everybody that was there, and, hope you had a good time.
So the Bucs are in the playoffs, getting ready for the divisional round matchup against the Detroit Lions. Chris Myers came on this podcast back in week 3, I think week 3 or 4, right after the Bucs had beat New Orleans.
It was week 4.
So he said at the time, we asked him if the Bucs were the real deal, and he said, quote, "They weren't doing it with kids' gloves." Well, here we are, a couple days removed from a 32-9 victory over the Eagles in the wild card round. And if there's one thing that this Bucs team has proved to me in 2023, they have proved that when they play at their best, they can more than compete, in my opinion, as a playoff team. They can go out there and they can beat the Eagles by 24 points. So I think there's a lot of reasons as to why the Bucs have come this far. We just gave Todd Bowles a bunch of credit, trusting the process, allowing the ebbs and flows of the regular season to happen, and ultimately the Bucs getting hot at the right time. We've talked about execution. We've talked about great coaching. But I think something that maybe falls by the wayside for a lot of people, and I know you wanted to get into this topic here. One of the reasons the Bucs have just been a decent team this year is because of how good this roster is, and Jason Light is a huge reason for that as well.
Yeah, he's a massive reason. And we talked about before the show what we were going to go over, and you said that you wanted to mention Todd Bowles, and I wanted to give Jason Light his props as well. And I will have an article coming out on Bucs Nation soon. I can't really exactly tell you when. It might not be this week, but it will be soon. Just detailing the job that Jason Light has done. I'm going to read you off a list. And it's a simple list, and it is people who not only have showed up on Monday night, but have showed up the entire season pretty much. Vita Vea, Elijah Canty, Yaya Diaby, Joe Trine-Schwinka, KJ Britt, Devin White, Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, Anton Winfield Jr., Zion McCollum, Christian Izien, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Cade Otton, Trey Palmer, Rashad White, Cody Malk, Tristan Wirfs, Luke Gedeke. One thing that all those guys have in common, outside of Izien, is they were all drafted by Jason Light. Izien is the exception because he was an undrafted free agent. Okay, but they were all drafted by Jason Light. And specifically, if you look at Cansey, Diaby, Tryon Shoyinka, you got Winfield, McCollum, Otten, Palmer, White, Malk, Wirfs, Gedeke, all drafted 2020 or later. So that shows me that he's done a great job of drafting and supplying this roster with not only good players, but depth as well. Gonna mention Shaq Barrett, Baker Mayfield, even David Moore, 3 free agents that have made an impact. Shaq Barrett, not so much this season, but dude, they signed him for a 1-year deal of $4 million. He had 19 and a half sacks the first year. Like, that's a great sign.
How are you going to mention free agents that make an impact and not mention our boy Money Mac?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean that's honestly the biggest one. I missed him out. He was the best signing this past offseason. Like, I'm sorry, Baker Mayfield fan. He was better than Baker Mayfield. I mean, that dude has arguably been the best kicker in the NFL this year. He has been unbelievable.
Statistically, the best season by a kicker in Tampa Bay Buccaneers history. Like, we're not just blowing smoke up this guy's ass. He has been the real deal.
Yeah, like he has been unbelievable. So shout out to Chase McLaughlin as well. But I just listed a bunch of players there, a bunch, and I don't know the exact number of how many I listed, but it matters. And even the guys that aren't on this team anymore. Sean Murphy-Bunting had a pretty good year with the Tennessee Titans. Jordan Whitehead. I think the Buccaneers missed Jordan Whitehead. Wouldn't be shocked if if the Buccaneers end up having maybe some interest in bringing back Jordan Whitehead in free agency. He is a free agent this offseason.
I would be so happy. Just to go on the record, man, I am such a big fan of Jordan Whitehead. I was so upset when we let him go. And I don't know if he's entirely played up to the contract that New York gave him.
He's been decent. I think he'll make a decent chunk of change. It won't be cheap, I do think they could have some interest in bringing him back.
I think the best he has ever looked has been right there in a Todd Bowles defense for sure.
Yeah, and then even like Mike Edwards, like the guys they weren't even able to re-sign have been impact players. You talk about finding a Cameron Brate and then re-signing him, finding an Adam Humphries and then re-signing him. Jason Light is proving that it wasn't just Tom Brady, right? Sure, Tom Brady helps. Rob Gronkowski helps. Antonio Brown helps. Like, yeah, like it all helps. Having like he also drafted, like we forget because he retired. He drafted Ali Marpet. He signed Ryan Jensen. Jason Light is a top 5 general manager in the sport. Like he just simply is. And I know there's criticism, just like we talked about with Todd Bowles. There's going to be some criticism. Not all draft picks are going to be hits. There's plenty of misses, right? He's had, for all the guys I just mentioned, there's the MJ Stewarts, there's the Roberto Aguayos, there's the Keyshawn Vaughns. Like, there's been some misses for sure. And every GM is going to have that.
We got a $5 super chat from Blue Wolf, new money, I think. Lions secondary isn't that great, so maybe we can take advantage of that and go deep to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and David Moore. It's going to be interesting to see how the Bucs are able to pass the ball this week, because if there's one thing they were not able to do at all against Detroit the first time these two teams played was throw the football. I think Baker Mayfield finished with less than 50% in his completion percentage. Let me see. Here we go. Mayfield in that first game against Detroit went 19 for 37, 206 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. Your leading receiver on the day was Chris Godwin, 6 catches, 77 yards, but not a single receiver found the end zone. The Bucs didn't even find the end zone themselves. It was 2 field goals was all they could muster. So we'll get into a little more detail on the game preview show, but after being called out by C.J. Gardner-Johnson, how do you think Baker Mayfield and ultimately this Buccaneers passing attack can take advantage of Detroit this week?
Yeah, well, really quick, just wrapping up the thing about Jason Light. I do, like I said, Jason Light, elite general manager. Also, shout out to Blue Wolf for the $5 super chat. Shout out to everybody in this chat right now. We have 231 people in this chat right now. That is more than we had Monday night, folks.
Yeah, that
is more than we had Monday. This was we didn't announce that we were doing this at whatever 1:50 p.m. on a Wednesday. Like we did. So shout out to all you guys in the chat. We appreciate all the super chats, all the likes, all the views, all the comments. Appreciate it all. You guys have been awesome this entire season. So shout out to you guys. So yeah, I do think the Buccaneers are going to try and air it out. And I do think that, the thing about it is that when you're looking to, attack this Detroit defense, right? This Detroit defense is vulnerable. This Detroit defense, I do think, can get, it can be attacked upon, I guess. The Rams did a pretty good job. The Rams did a pretty good job of attacking them, and really teams all year. That's been the big bugaboo for Detroit. That has been the big bugaboo for the Detroit Lions, and Gardner-Johnson can help. They brought him in to help, and I do think that the Bucs, again, giving Mayfield time. The Lions are a physical football team. They're going to want to rush the passer. You give Mayfield time, and I do think that there could be options there to explore. And also, really quick, like on the interception, even in with the week 6 game, Mayfield, the ball was tipped. If you remember, though, he had Mike Evans was wide open. Like, it would have been a touchdown.
Yeah,
there was, again, we go back to that week 6 game. There was opportunities in that week 6 game. Just the plays weren't made. So, I do think, like I said, it's all about execution.
Yeah, execution is going to be a big thing, and I'd say another huge difference between the Bucs then and now is back in week 5, they were coming out of the bye week 3-1, high expectations, but realistically, the team had not found any type of rhythm on the offensive side of the ball at all. They didn't really hone in Rachaad White's usage. Baker Mayfield wasn't 100% comfortable in the pocket. I know he was under pressure for most of that Detroit game as well. So there's a lot of things that, now that the Bucs have found their rhythm and now that we know what this offense can look like when they play their best, it's going to be interesting to see how effective this game plan can ultimately be on Sunday against a tough Detroit defense. But we'll get into more details on Friday for our game preview. Wanted to kind of bounce back and talk about the state of the Bucs and maybe forecast the future a little bit, if that's okay with you. We talk about this Sunday's game, and win or lose, I think for most level-headed Bucs fans, you could say this season was a success. After that playoff win being what it was, the fashion that it was, it's hard to write this season off as anything else. I think.
It has to be a success.
Yeah.
I predicted 6 wins. You predicted 7. I mean, this is even beyond, and we're usually pretty close, on our predictions. Like, we've been pretty close for a long time, right? And I know the NFC South was pretty bad. Obviously with 6 wins, I didn't have them winning the NFC South at 6-11. I'm guessing with 7 wins, you didn't have them winning the NFC South at 7-10. I didn't think the division was going to be that bad. If they only won 7 games, they wouldn't have won the division. Like, the division wasn't that bad. So yeah, I think it has to be a success. It's exceeded, I think, a lot of the expectations that even the people that didn't have them winning 3 or 4 games, didn't have them picking Caleb Williams or Drake May. I think it's exceeded those expectations even of the people who were like, yeah, they're not going to be that bad, but they might not be particularly good. It's been a massive success for the amount of dead cap they've been in, taking the chance on Baker Mayfield, taking the chance on a first-year play caller and Dave Canales. It's been massive. And a lot of those guys that I mentioned, right? The Christian Izien, Kalijah Cansey, Yaya Diaby, KJ Britt, Kate Otten, Trey Palmer, Cody Malk, Rachaad White, Luke Gedeke. A lot of those guys are rookies. Or, Luke Gedeke struggled last year at guard, switched him to right tackle. How is he going to respond to right tackle? Even Tristan Wirfs moving from right tackle to left tackle. How is he going to respond to playing left tackle? How is Kate Otten going to be with a bigger role? How is Rachaad White going to be with a bigger role? Christian Izien, Zion McCollum, KJ Britt, how is he going to be with a bigger role? These guys have really stepped up. So, yeah, I do think it's been a massive success, and that's where we talk about culture, right? And building that winning culture. That is building that winning culture. That's exactly what that looks like.
Yeah, it's a continuity that the franchise hasn't had before. And the finality of what next season is going to look like, knowing that Todd Bowles is back, Baker Mayfield's going to be coming back, and a lot of these veterans, the Bucs are going to make a legitimate effort to re-sign. Like, I think this team isn't going to look exactly the same. There's going to be some shuffling in certain
There's
positions.
going to be some changes, yeah.
But Mike Evans will probably be back. Chris Godwin's definitely going to be back. Maybe a couple of other wide receivers, but I have to imagine Trey Palmer, even though he has had a couple of fumbles, has played well enough to secure a roster spot next year. I guess we'll find out from training camp. But the consistency of this team, and as of right now, the way that everything feels like a sure thing. You know, before, when there were tough decisions to be made about the Bucs, like retaining Dirk Cutter, always felt like such a tough decision because you didn't know. You were relying on that upside, and you were relying on the idea that, like, hey, 1 year in 2016, this team went from 3-5 to 8-5. So maybe, you know, Jameis can continue to develop, and maybe they can retain some talent and continue to build. Cutter wasn't head coach material. We saw it happen. That team didn't get any better. This Bucs team, the way that things have played out this year and the way that, honestly, they have gotten to where they are, it doesn't feel fluky. It doesn't feel unsure. Like, I feel confident expecting improvement next year. And even if it's one game, 10-7, 11-6, I still have a gut feeling that's going to be enough to win the NFC South at the end of the day. So expecting this Bucs team with the continuity that it has never had to improve next season under head coach Todd Bowles. I feel really good about where things are right now. And I think for the first time since I have been covering this team on the podcast, since you have been covering this team on the podcast, you know, aside from going into the next season with the same head coach after winning a Super Bowl, like it's been a while since, you know, I think the Bucs were able to not only prove a lot of people wrong, but make people feel good about the following season. I know I was kind of babbling a lot there, but you know what I was saying, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think there was a lot of anticipation after the first Cutter year of going 9-7. You know, in that offseason, they added Deshaun Jackson, they added Chris Baker, they drafted O.J. Howard, they drafted Chris Godwin. You know, there's a lot of anticipation there, and the team just fell flat. You know, went 5-11, and then they decided to retain Cutter, and they went 5-11 again. So, yeah, I do agree that, like, because here's the thing, it's just like what I mentioned. You know, they went 9-8. They won a division with all these question marks, right? And not a lot of money. Like, they're going to be able, it won't be an exorbitant amount because they have to re-sign a lot of guys, but they're going to be able to spend a little bit of money in free agency. Like they'll be a little bit more active free agency than they were this year, right? You're not going to be looking at just basically signing Baker Mayfield, Chase McLaughlin, and Ryan Neal, right? Like, that was pretty much, you know, they signed Matt Filer to a veteran minimum. Like, you know, that was pretty much their free agency. This year, I think I do expect them to be a little bit more active and adding a little bit more talent in certain areas. So you have that. You have another draft class, which, like I've just mentioned a bunch of times, Jason Light has knocked the drafts out of the park recently. So, you know, you're adding more talent to this team, and it's on the players to execute, of course, and it's each year's different, right? The performance of a guy 1 year and the performance of a guy the next year, it could be completely different. It is a year-to-year league. I think Tom Brady always used to say that, like, you know, what you did last year doesn't really matter. It's a new thing, right? It's a brand new team. So yeah, but there is going to be opportunity, and I do think, like, Bucs fans wouldn't be wrong for, like, expecting improvement, even, like, being disappointed maybe with a 9-8 record, like being a little bit bummed out. Like, the schedule is difficult. Like, they have a first place schedule. You know, you're gonna look at that schedule, and they're gonna be playing a lot of good teams. But, like, you could be, like, maybe, like, a little bit disappointed if they only win 8 or 9 games next year. Whereas this year, you're like, oh, I'll take that. You know, but the expectations now have changed. Are you expecting 13, 14 wins? I don't think. I think you're setting yourself up for disappointment by expecting that. But at the same time, yeah, you look at the NFC South. I think New Orleans, it's still going to be a tough game. Division games are always tough. New Orleans, as we've seen this year, really, right? The games are tough. Atlanta, I think, has a chance. if they nail this head coaching hire, if they get the right quarterback, I think they have a chance to make a jump. So I do think like Atlanta could be a team, but like Carolina is in a rebuild. And look, like even though Atlanta or could make a jump, New Orleans could still be there. There's still a ton of questions about those guys. So even entering 2024, you're going to have a good shot to win this division again. So I do think that's important. And the expectations of Bucs fans, I think, should be to maybe not win the division, but at least, strongly compete for this division. And I do think that, it's a long, come a long way, basically, from where you were basically 2009 to 2019, where it was like, yeah, you went every year, basically, like not expecting to compete for the division at all. And here you are expecting to compete for it and possibly win it.
Yeah, not only do we get to enjoy the recent success with the Tom Brady era, but this season proved that, the Bucs were a team not expected to do much this year. And here they are. They are in a good place after going through cap hell, signing what was thought to be a Band-Aid quarterback worth $4 million, in Baker Mayfield. He hits all of incentives, and the Bucs are about to play the Lions of all teams here in the divisional round. So you can't, if this is where the season ends this weekend, I'm not going to talk like it is because we don't know. We'll dive into that on Friday. We'll make our game picks. It'll be a lot of fun. We hope you're there. But like if this is where it ends, and you look at everything that the Bucs had faced before the season, you cannot fault Todd Bowles one bit when in the grand scheme of things, the Bucs potentially fell short one game before the NFC Championship game, because I think even the people who expected the Bucs to make the postseason, winning the division like I did for most of the year, I think you probably did. Even the people who expected them to make the playoffs didn't expect them to win in the style that they did. So this team has proved a lot, and I think that win over Philly was the culmination of a lot of the work that they have put in, but they're in a good spot, and I feel really, really good about the future of this football team. Any final thoughts, Evan, before we wrap this thing on up?
Yeah, and I just think the one thing about that playoff game is when you looked at the regular season, right? The Buccaneers, I said it many times, like the Buccaneers, they couldn't beat a winning team in the regular season. Like anytime they ran into a good team, they were able to beat the bad teams. They were able to sometimes even beat the average teams. But when you played the good teams, Philly, Buffalo, Houston, San Francisco, you couldn't, even just like I meant, Detroit, like you couldn't beat them, and that matters. And I think that's why this win against Philly, Bucs fans' confidence is right now so high because they proved it, right? And even though Philly has been struggling, Philly's been one of the worst teams in the NFL. Like they have been over the last month and a half. I'd be lying to you if I didn't say that, right? Like Philly was not the same team that they faced in Week 3. But it's still the reigning NFC champions. Like that still matters. They still have a ton of talent on that football team. And yeah, I just think it's been a massive confidence boost for Bucs fans. And for almost 300 people in the chat right now, thank you all so much. And we'll be seeing you guys on Friday.
Yeah, this midweek show definitely didn't expect to get on here and talk to 300 people, but we truly do appreciate your guys' support. Subscribe to the channel if you have not already for more great Tampa Bay Buccaneers content. We usually have 3 podcasts a week and some more video content in between those days. So looking forward to bringing you some more content this week to get you ready for the game. Find the show on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those are Cannon Fire Podcast. Best place to go for updates on the show. And of course, Tampa Bay Buccaneer news as it happens. Speaking of Bucs news as it happens, you can follow my co-host Evan on Instagram at Bucs_daily. You can also find him on Twitter at EvanNFL and check out his written work at BucsNation.com. You got the Q&A this week. Anything else?
Got the Q&A this week, and then I also will have an X Factor out. Still deciding who my X Factor is going to be. Like I said, last week it was Levante David and Devin White. This week, still deciding on that. I'll give you guys a little preview, leaning towards Baker Mayfield just because of his performance against Detroit last time and how I think that made a difference in that game. So I do think he could be an X Factor in this one. But still haven't made a final decision. Stay tuned to BucsNation.com for all that.
Well, he's under a telescope this week, so it'll definitely be exciting to watch. Last but not least, you can find myself on Instagram and Twitter at Redicus, RHETTAKUS. If you follow me, I will follow you back, but that's the show. Thank you once again to everybody in the live chat and all the new viewers stopping by. Subscribe for more, and we will talk to you on Friday. We'll be back with some special guests as we preview the NFL divisional round of the playoffs. Bucs Lions this Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Should be one hell of a game. We'll talk to you soon. Until then, and as always, thank you again for listening, and go Bucs.